Thank you to all of the youth commissioners for sharing their thoughts. Next, it is my honor to introduce California Attorney General Mr. Rob Bonta, a trailblazer and champion of justice, equity, and fairness. Sworn in as the 34th Attorney General of California, he made history as the first Filipino American and only the second Asian American to hold this esteemed position. His appointment marked a significant milestone in California's commitment to representation. AG Bonta's passion for justice was ignited early. Born in the Philippines and immigrating to the United States at 2 months of age, initially living in the trailer park at the United Farm Workers headquarters in Keene, California, then moving to Sacramento where he graduated from Bella Vista High School as valedictorian. He's passionate about fighting systemic injustice and advocating for marginalized communities. A graduate of Yale University, where he played D1 soccer, and Yale Law School, he has carried these values throughout his career, from his time as a deputy city attorney in San Francisco to his tenure in this California State Assembly. In fact, during his time in the California State Assembly, Attorney General Bonta spearheaded banning private prisons and detention centers, strengthening hate crime protections, and advancing environmental justice. As Attorney General since 2021, he's continued this legacy by addressing gun violence, confronting hate crimes, and defending reproductive rights. We are privileged to hear directly from Attorney General Bonta today about his vision for justice in California and how young leaders can play a vital role in shaping a more equitable future. Following his remarks, our fireside chat will explore the most pressing issues facing the youth today. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to California Attorney General Rob Bonta.
Good morning, everybody. How you all doing today? Good. Everybody feeling good and pumped and inspired? Going well so far today? I know it's early on a Saturday, so. Well, thanks, Rohan, for the very kind introduction. Thanks for organizing this wonderful get-together of youth leaders, and I'm grateful to be here. I'll start with just a few remarks about the moment that we're in, I think what it calls us to do and requires of all of us, and then looking forward to our fireside chat. Let me first say, is anyone here in college? Everyone's in high school, right? College, right? Who are seniors in high school? Cool. Any juniors? Wow. Any sophomores? You guys are on it. Any freshmen? Okay. Ever any middle school folks? All right. Elementary? Any kindergartners in here? No, awesome. Well, I love it. Thank you for being committed, engaged. It's always inspiring for me when I see youth doing what you're doing. Caring, fighting, engaging, being active. We need that. And I'll just first say that sometimes people say our young people are the leaders of tomorrow. And that is definitely true. But you're also the leaders of today. You don't need to wait. You don't need to get in line. You don't need to be an adult out of college before you can do things. In fact, some of the greatest movements have been led by our youth, our students. Our civil rights movement had great youth leaders, and our anti-war and pro-peace movements have had great young leaders. So whatever you're feeling, whatever's in your heart, the passion that you have to fight, use it now. Fight now. It's an all hands on deck moment where everyone needs to be involved in reinforcing the fundamentals of who we are as a nation, our Constitution, our rule of law, our separation of powers, our different branches of government. And all of those are being challenged right now, and so we'll talk a little bit about that. I do also want to say I do acknowledge and want to acknowledge that there's a lot of concern, a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety, maybe even fear in our communities across the state. As I've gone up and down our state talking to community members and community leaders, that has definitely been part of what I've been hearing. People are worried about immigration enforcement. They're worried about court orders not being followed potentially. They're worried about constitutional rights being stripped away, freedoms like for the First Amendment or the right to birthright citizenship. If you're born on American soil, you're a citizen. That's been the U.S. constitutional rule for decades. And so I want to say that you're right to be worried. And I'll say this about progress. Progress is never linear. We always have steps forward, steps back. We have obstacles and pitfalls, and challenges, and the question isn't whether we're gonna have challenges, we certainly will. And that the only question is, what do we do next when we face those challenges? How do we respond? Are we quiet? Do we recede and stay silent, or do we step up and lean in to what we know makes us a great nation and fight for it and have courage? And right now, I think there's so many important things that we need to do, but I think 3 of them can be summed up with the following. We need courts. We, the attorneys general, my office, are bringing cases in court to challenge unlawful actions by the Trump administration. We need crowds, so people showing up and showing out with their presence, like recently when we had the hands-off rallies all across the nation. And we need courage. We need people to fight for our rights, to stand on our rights, and if our rights are violated, make sure that they're vindicated and not give in to bullying or to bluffing. For law firms that are threatened, don't go to the White House and cut a deal. Fight for your rights. Don't be beaten into submission and allow your rights to be violated. And especially for attorneys, to do that is something that I just can't accept. So it's important to have the courage to fight for the rights that we have. We have them for a reason. They're there so that we're protected, and important that we have that courage going forward. So we all come to this moment with our own lived experiences, our own histories, and I'm no exception. As someone who was born in another country, I was born in the Philippines, and I was born in a time when my parents looked at themselves and said, can we raise our son here and make sure he has the things that are non-negotiable for us? They wanted me to have freedom. They wanted me to have democracy. They wanted me to have the rule of law and due process. They wanted me to have human rights, civil rights. And their answer to that question at that time in the early 70s in the Philippines was, no, I could not have those things if I was raised there. And so 2 months after I was born, my parents decided to bring me to California because a dictator was rising to power. Martial law was around the corner, and the end of democracy was just months away. And my parents were right with their predictions. They saw it coming. Exactly a year from the date of my birth, Ferdinand Marcos declared martial law. Free and fair elections were over, democracy gone. The will of the people was being stymied, and people who spoke out against the end to democracy and this dictatorial rule were arrested and imprisoned and often tortured and sometimes killed. And my mom was a political opponent, and she wanted democracy for the people in her country. She was born in the Philippines and came to the United States for the first time when she was 28 years old. So my parents brought me here to California, where they knew I could have those things, where they knew we could have democracy, we could have freedom, we could have the rule of law, we could have rights. They also knew that you can't just put your chin on your elbow, look out the window, and hope and wait for the things that you want. You have to fight for the things that you want. You have to be part of the work that creates the society that you desire. So they started working for the United Farm Workers of America. They started working as part of the lettuce boycott outside of supermarkets in Los Angeles, collecting signatures, grabbed their clipboards, had their sleeves rolled up, and then we were invited to go to the headquarters of the UFW. We went to the Central Valley, specifically La Paz, the iconic and famed headquarters of the UFW, and we lived in a trailer there. My dad worked in the front office with Cesar Chavez. My mom worked in the preschool with Dolores Huerta. They fought for a fair contract and for safe working conditions for the people who are feeding our state and our nation. And prior to that, I mentioned my mom grew up in the Philippines. She came to California for the first time, Berkeley specifically, to go to grad school. She met my father there, and it was 1965 in Berkeley, California. And my dad at that time was involved in the civil rights movement, and he had a friend who was in Selma, Alabama, who was sending him these audio cassette tapes from across the country in the US mail. And does anybody here know what an audio cassette tape is? Oh, wow, good stuff. You guys are studying history. But like a digital audio file, but like something that you actually hold and you put in a player. My dad would listen to these audio cassette tapes. They were tapes of Martin Luther King Jr. speaking. And his friend in Selma, Alabama was saying, you gotta hear this guy. You gotta come here and be part of this vision, this movement to make our country more fair, more just, move it closer to being a more perfect union. So he did. He felt called to action. That was his call to action. He jumped on a train, went to Selma, Alabama, was in Brown Chapel AME Church when Martin Luther King Jr. himself appeared unannounced to deliver a sermon. So he listened in Selma, Alabama to Martin Luther King Jr. in the middle of the civil rights movement. He organized for civil rights, he organized for voting rights. He was part of that student-led movement that we talked about earlier. That was making our state, our nation more fair and more just. And then I wanted to talk about the civil rights movement, the farm worker movement, and then finally a movement that my mom was involved in that I remember most, because as I grew up in Sacramento, California, I would go with my mom to protests and rallies and demonstrations for years, year after year, as a young boy, calling out the human rights abuses of the Ferdinand Marcos dictatorship, demanding the return of democracy. And I always wondered what some little boy and his mom could do, what meaning we had for literally a dictatorship that was an ocean away, another country on the other side of the world. And year after year, I realized we weren't alone. There were more people like us, certainly here in the United States, but definitely in the Philippines, rising up, demanding something different, wanting democracy. And it took time, and some of the most important things take time, but it took 14 years from the date of the Declaration of Martial Law till the date of the People Power Revolution that ushered democracy back into the Philippines and chased out a dictator, never to return, and brought power back to the people in the Philippines. So I talk about the civil rights movement, the farm worker movement, the democracy movement in the Philippines to say that these are everyday people powered movements. My parents didn't have any special titles or fancy positions. They were everyday folks who wanted to make a difference, and they were working side by side with other everyday folks. And they looked out at the world and they said, you can't accept the unacceptable. You can't make normal, say something is normal and normalize what is abnormal. And we're in that moment now, where we can't accept the unacceptable. We can't accept attacks on our Constitution, stripping away of our freedom, attacks on our rights, and it's not normal. It's not normal. And so what have we been doing? I never thought I would be the Attorney General of the state of California. As a boy born in another country, raised by working parents, my parents worked in Sacramento. We would drive by the Capitol sometimes. I would go with my parents to work. I'd look at the Capitol and wonder who was in there and how they got there, and I had no idea. And I would look at photos of the people in there, and nobody looked like me. And it was so close geographically, but could have been a million miles away in terms of how inaccessible it was and how much of a different world it was. I also saw my parents as everyday folks who were fighting for better conditions and more fair policies for people. I saw them sometimes ask elected officials to side with them and join these fights and have their back and be part of the same effort for change. And most of the time, the elected officials would say no. They would have other priorities they were focused on. And I thought, I saw my parents' disappointment, and I thought that maybe one day I could be an elected official who said yes to the people. And so that's been my goal in elected office, to make your fights, Californians' fights, my constituents' fights, to make them my fights. And whatever is important to you, make it important to me, and use my positional power, my authority to make a difference in those areas. And right now, across the country, that includes so many different things. In California, it includes so many different things: public safety, affordability, housing, cost of living, health, access to health care, certainly protecting our constitutional rights and freedoms. And we try to do it all. And right now, part of that means making sure that we have an administration that is following the law in Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, it's not. And my hope was that it would. Didn't know what would happen in this second administration of President Trump. But if the first administration was an indication, it looked very possible that there would be many unlawful actions. And we have had to bring lawsuits 14 times now in less than 14 weeks, more than one a week. And it's all based on what the Trump administration does. We cannot go into court if all we have is political grievance or an ideological difference or a policy difference with the administration. The president's the president. He is allowed to exercise his presidential authority. Elections matter. He has constitutional authority given to him. But if he tries to exercise authority that he doesn't have, like Congress's authority, or the state's authority, or something that is prohibited by the Constitution or prohibited by federal law, he's not allowed to do that. And our Constitution was built deliberately and intentionally to disperse power throughout the system, not to allow it to be consolidated in one place. The Constitution, if it says nothing else, it says we shall have no kings, we shall have no monarchs, we shall have no authoritarians. They wanted power spread. So they spread it out through the three branches, across the three branches of government: judicial, legislative, executive. They also, that's the horizontal disbursement of power by the Constitution. They also spread it out vertically so that the federal government and the states and local governments all had authority as well. But this president has a view of executive authority that is not supported by the law, and he has acted on that view multiple times, including on day one of his administration, the day he got inaugurated on January 20th, seeking to violate the Constitution by issuing an executive order that ended birthright citizenship. That he tried to amend the Constitution with an executive order. There's a way to amend the Constitution should the people of this country want to do that. You can get 2/3 votes in each house, and then you can put it to the states, and if 3/4 of the states ratify that constitutional amendment, it's an amendment. It's happened before. If you wanted to amend the Constitution, you could do it that way, but you can't do it by an executive order. So we sued him, and we blocked, at least for now, through a restraining order and a preliminary injunction, that unconstitutional and un-American action that would prevent children born in America, on American soil, from being U.S. citizens. So that was day one, and that was, if that's what he was willing to do on day one, it wasn't a good harbinger or indicator of what he might do going forward. And he's tried to withhold $3 trillion of money that Congress, which has the power of the purse, Congress, which has the power to appropriate and spend, had already appropriated. He's not allowed to do that. Congress can make decisions about how they spend money, but the president can't change a congressional appropriation. And so he's done that multiple times, trying to withhold education funding, health funding, teacher grant funding, money for housing and food and healthcare and other issues. And then recently he imposed tariffs. This is our most recent case, our 14th case. We brought a suit this week. I was with Governor Newsom in the Central Valley. Tariffs are taxes. Congress has the power to impose taxes, not the president. Congress has delegated authority to the executive branch to impose some taxes under some conditions, but the authority that the president relies on, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, doesn't mention the word tariffs once. In its 50-year existence, never once has any president imposed any tariffs using that authority. It doesn't allow him to impose tariffs, much less tariffs against every trading partner of the United States, over 200 countries, which sent our economy into a tailspin, led to the 2 worst days in the history of the U.S. stock market, and will raise your costs, American families' costs, by thousands of dollars every year and increase inflation. So it's not just a bad policy, it's illegal and unconstitutional. So we have brought a suit against him as well on that issue. So we can talk about all of our different suits. I'll just tell you this. Sometimes people say, when do you sue? What's your goal in suing? What are your priorities? We have one priority, that the President of the United States follow the law. Period. Full stop. That's it. If he follows the law, we never go to court to sue him, because there's nothing to sue him for. He's following the law. But each and every time he breaks the law, violates the Constitution, violates federal law, we will sue him. It is not a lot to ask that our President of the United States follow the law, comply with the Constitution. That should be a given. But this president is not aligned with that view. So we have to go to court, and the courts have been time and look, if I know some people might wonder what the validity of our cases are, just look at the results. In nearly every case, we have gotten restraining orders, preliminary injunctions. Part of the analysis to get a restraining order or a preliminary injunction is a determination by a judge, an independent official looking at this case, that we are likely to succeed on the merits. They're saying you're likely to win. You have the merits in your favor, and you're likely to suffer irreparable or irreversible harm if we don't stop the action of the president, so they stop it. for now while the case proceeds. So it's a difficult moment. It's a time for everyone to step up. I have an official role that I will continue to lean into unapologetically and aggressively, led by our values, led by our North Star of making sure that we have a president and a nation that follows the rule of law and observes the requirements of our Constitution. And you have a role too. Everyone has a role. And it's important for everyone to step up, whether you're Senator Cory Booker and you're gonna set the record for filibustering, even though they don't have the votes to make change. He did something that he could do. And he inspired the nation when he did it. Or you're Senator Van Hollen, and you have a constituent who was not given due process and was deported to another country and put in a jail in another country without due process. That is fundamental. And you go to El Salvador to meet with them and to try to bring him home. Everyone has something that they can do. And young people certainly can organize, can protest, and raise your voices, can lift up your values and be part of the effort. I'll end with this. The president's bosses are not his billionaire buddies or big corporations. His bosses are you and me and us, the voters, the people of the United States. The most potent power that there is people power. That is the design of our Constitution. And people will always have the first and last word. And if we are not happy with our leaders, we can change our leaders. We have a nation that is of, for, and by the people. And so the people need to speak. And we are often, I think we can speak more often and more loudly. The hands-off rallies were a great speech and example of us speaking out. But we need to continue and make sure that we demand leaders and policies that comply with what we want. And if we aren't happy with our representation, we can change it. That's how it works in our country. So we will continue to be unified. We will continue to fight for California's values. In California, progress will prevail, and we're going to continue to do our part. And I just want to encourage you, do your part as well. We all have a role to play. We can all make a difference. We can all make sure that the progress that we want, the nation that we want, the nation that we deserve, is one that we are able, is one that we protect and that we secure for many generations ahead. So I will leave it at that. Thanks, everybody.